In the 149th year of Greek rule, Judas learned that 𝗕nci𝗂𝗂𝗏 was marching with a great army towards Judea. He had with him Lysias, his guardian and second in command, and each had an army of 110,000 foot soldiers, 5,300 horsemen, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with deadly blades to cut down foot soldiers. Menelaus joined them, and with great pretense he urged Antiochus on. But he was not really looking out for the welfare of his country, he simply hoped to strengthen his political position. The King of Kings caused Antiochus to become angry at the wicked man. So when Lysias suggested that Menelaus was the cause of all their trouble, Antiochus commanded that Menelaus be taken to Berea in Syria and executed according to their local custom. For in Berea there was a tower 25 meters high, with sides steeply sloping down to piles of ashes all around it. Anyone guilty of sacrilege or notorious for other crimes is taken to the top of the tower and thrown down into the ashes to die. That was the fate of sinful Menelaus, and he was not even given a decent burial. It was only fitting that he die in ashes because he had committed many sins against the altar of the temple, the fire and ashes of which are holy. The king was consumed with savage arrogance, and he had plans, even worse than his father's, to devastate the Jews. When Judas learned of these plans, he ordered the people to pray to the Lord day and night, asking him to help them now more than ever. For they feared that they would be deprived of the law of Moses, their land, and the holy temple. They prayed that God would not let his people be overtaken again by blasphemous Gentiles, for they were only now recovering from past troubles. They all joined in this prayer and begged the Lord to be merciful. For 3 days they continually wept, fasted, and lay face down before the Lord, and then Judas encouraged them and ordered them to stand ready. After consulting with the high council, Judas decided not to wait for the king to lead his army into Judea to make himself master of the city. Judas decided instead to rely on the Lord to help them defeat the king's army in open warfare. So Judas committed everything to the Creator of the world and encouraged his troops to fight bravely, even to death, in defense of the laws of Moses, the temple, the city of Jerusalem, and their country and its citizens. Judas set up camp near Modane, and he gave his soldiers their battle cry, "God brings us victory." Then, with a select contingent of brave young men, he attacked the king's camp at night and killed as many as 2,000 men in the camp. He also killed the lead elephant with its driver. Having created great fear and confusion in the enemy camp, they left with great success just as dawn was breaking. This all happened because the Lord helped and protected them. The king, having seen the daring of the Jews, resorted to making strategic attacks against their positions. He advanced with his army against Beth-zur, a strong fortress of the Jews, but he was held off and defeated. Judas was able to send supplies to reinforce the defenders. And though Rhodocus, a Jewish soldier, supplied the enemy with secret information, his fellow soldiers discovered the plot, hunted him down, and took him to prison. Then once more the king made a treaty with the people of Beth-zur, and they exchanged pledges of peace. When the king left them, he went to fight Judas and his men, but he was beaten again. Then the king learned that Philip, who had been left in charge of the government by Antiochus Epiphanes, had rebelled at Antioch. The king was worried and made peace with the Jews, promising to honor their demands. When the peace treaty was finalized, the king offered sacrifices and honored the temple by leaving generous gifts for the holy place. He accepted Maccabeus with kindness and appointed Hegemonides as governor of the region stretching from Ptolemais in the north to Gera in the south. Then the king visited Ptolemais, but the people of that city were very unhappy with the peace treaty. They were so angry that they wanted to cancel its terms. But Lysias went up to the speaker's platform and argued in favor of the treaty the best he could. Finally, he convinced the people, and they were satisfied. Then the king returned to Antioch. This was how the king's invasion and withdrawal turned out. 3 years later, Judas and his men heard that Demetrius, son of Seleucus, had sailed into the port of Tripolis with a powerful army and navy. He had killed 𝗕nciokis-eupator and his guardian Lysias and then declared himself king. Now 𝗕cimus had been the high priest, but he voluntarily participated in sinful practices during the time of the revolt. He realized he was now in danger and there was no way for him to regain his position at the holy altar. So he went to King Demetrius in the 151st year of Greek rule and presented him with a gold crown and a palm branch as well as a customary gift of olive branches from the temple. On that day he kept quiet about his intentions. But 𝗕cimus eventually found an opportunity to further his mad plans, for Demetrius called him to a meeting and asked about the attitudes and intentions of the Jews. 𝗕cimus answered, "Those Jews called Hasidians, who are led by Judas Maccabeus, keep stirring up wars and rebellions and will not allow the country to enjoy peace. That is why I have been deprived of my ancestors' glory, I mean the high priesthood. So now I have come here, first out of loyalty to the king's interests but also to provide for the good of my own people. Our entire nation suffers terribly from the unreasonable conduct of those men. Since you know all these things, O king, I beg you to show kindness to our country and our people, for your generosity and kindness are known to everyone. As long as Judas lives, it is not possible for the country to enjoy peace." When he had said all this, the rest of the king's favored leaders, who were also enemies of Judas, further stirred up Demetrius's anger against Judas. Immediately the king selected Nicanor, who was commander of the elephants, and appointed him governor of Judea. He gave him orders to kill Judas, scatter his troops, and make 𝗕cimus the high priest of the great temple. The Gentiles who had fled from Judea to escape from Judas joined Nicanor in large numbers, for they thought that defeating and harming the Jews would serve their own good. When the Jews heard that Nicanor was coming and that the Gentiles were assembled to attack them, they put dust on their heads to express their grief. Then they prayed to the one who established his own people forever and who always protects them by revealing his presence with them. Then, at the order of their leader, the Jews moved out and went to the town of 𝗕 to meet the enemy. Judas's brother Simon had once fought against Nicanor but was stopped suddenly when he saw so many enemies. But Nicanor had heard of the bravery of Judas and his men. He had seen their courage as they fought for their country, so he was afraid and chose not to resolve the issue in battle. Instead, he sent Posidonius, Theodotus, and Mattathias ahead to offer and receive pledges of peace. After the terms of the treaty had been fully considered, both leaders informed their troops. Everyone seemed in favor of the treaty, so they consented to the agreement. Then a day was chosen when the leaders could meet together, and chariots brought them to seats of honor set up between the two armies. Judas positioned armed men in strategic places to be ready for any treachery attempted by the enemy, but the conference went smoothly. After this, Nicanor stayed in Jerusalem and did not cause trouble, dismissing the Gentiles who had joined him. Nicanor kept Judas close to him because he had become warmly attached to him. He urged Judas to marry and raise a family. So Judas married, settled down, and lived a normal life. When 𝗕cimus saw that the two men had become friends, he went to Demetrius with a copy of the treaty. 𝗕cimus complained that Nicanor was being disloyal because he had appointed Judas, a conspirator against them, to succeed him as one of the king's favored leaders. Roused by 𝗕cimus's false accusations, the king became angry. He wrote to Nicanor saying that he was displeased with the terms of the treaty, and he ordered him to immediately send Maccabeus to Antioch as a prisoner. Nicanor was disturbed when he received the message, for he did not want to break his agreement with a man who had done him no wrong. But because he could not oppose the king, he waited for an opportunity to carry out the orders by some clever scheme. When Maccabeus saw that Nicanor was no longer friendly to him and was actually rude when they met, he sensed trouble brewing. So he gathered together many of his men and hid himself from Nicanor. When Nicanor realized that Judas had outwitted him, he went to the great and holy temple and commanded the priests who were offering the customary sacrifices to hand Judas over to him. When they swore to him that they did not know where Judas was, he stretched out his right hand towards the sanctuary and swore this oath: "If you do not hand over Judas to me as a prisoner, I will level this temple of God to the ground and tear down the altar. Then I will erect a new temple to Dionysus." After saying this, he left. The priests raised their hands towards heaven and called upon the one who has always defended our nation. They prayed, "O Lord of all things, you need nothing, yet you were pleased to give us a temple so that you could live among us. So now, O Lord of all holiness, keep this house forever undefiled, for it has only recently been purified." 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃, a member of the High Council in Jerusalem, was a man who loved his people and was highly esteemed. Because of his kindness towards them, he was called the father of the Jews. But 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃 was denounced to Nicanor. In the early days of the revolt, 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃 had been accused of practicing the traditions of the Jewish faith, for which he was ready to give body and soul. Nicanor was determined to show his hatred for the Jews, so he sent 500 soldiers to arrest 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃. Nicanor thought that by taking him into custody he would be dealing the Jews a severe blow. The soldiers trapped 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃 in a tower and tried to set fire to the door in order to gain entrance. But just as he was about to be captured, 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃 threw himself on his own sword. He chose to die a noble death rather than to fall into the hands of wicked men who would abuse and humiliate him in ways that a man of his stature should never have to endure. But in all the excitement, he failed to make his wound fatal. With the mob rushing in through the door, 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗃 courageously ran to the top of the wall and threw himself down on the crowd. But the people quickly jumped out of his way, and he landed on the ground. Then, still breathing and inflamed with rage, he got up and ran through the crowd with blood gushing from his terrible wound. He climbed a steep rock and, nearly drained of blood, tore out his intestines with both hands and threw them into the crowd. He then called on the Lord of life and spirit to allow him to live again. This was how he died.